Someone told me I needed a 6-month emergency fund. 6 months. I can barely make it 6 days. And that moment right there is what this whole video is about. So I was scrolling through finance content like I do when I'm trying to figure out this money stuff, and everywhere I looked, people were saying the same thing. You need an emergency fund. 3 to 6 months of expenses. Save it before you do anything else. And I kept thinking, okay, but what does that even look like when you're starting from basically nothing? Like, what does that number actually mean for someone who is just trying to keep the lights on? Today, I want to walk through something smaller. Something that actually felt possible to me when I first heard it. The idea of starting with just $100 as your first emergency fund. And I know that sounds almost embarrassingly small, but stick with me because once I started thinking through why that number matters, something genuinely clicked for me, and I want to share that process. So let me start with the standard advice, because I do think it's worth understanding where this whole emergency fund idea comes from before I explain why it made me feel kind of defeated at first. The core idea is simple. Life throws unexpected expenses at you. Your car breaks down, your tooth starts hurting, your phone screen cracks, and you use your phone for work. Whatever it is, these things happen, and they cost money you often don't have planned for. So the advice is to build a cushion, a pool of money sitting somewhere safe that you can reach for when life gets messy without having to go into debt or panic. Financial experts generally say you want 3 to 6 months worth of your living expenses saved up for this purpose. So if you spend around $2,000 a month on rent, food, utilities, transport, all of that, then you're looking at somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000 sitting in a savings account doing nothing except giving you peace of mind. And look, I get why that goal exists. It makes sense in theory. If you lose your job or something major breaks, you have a runway. You have time to figure things out without immediately drowning. The logic is completely sound. But here's my honest first reaction. When I heard that number, I laughed. Not in a mean way. Just in a this feels completely disconnected from my reality kind of way. Because when you're starting from nearly zero, being told you need $10,000 saved before you're financially responsible feels like being told to run a marathon when you haven't learned how to jog yet. And I think a lot of people in my position just kind of shut down at that point. You hear the advice, you realize you can't do it right now, and then you do nothing. Because the goal feels so far away, it doesn't even feel like a goal. It feels like a criticism. There was this moment I had a few months back. Nothing dramatic. I just got hit with an unexpected bill, something small, a couple $100s for a car thing, and I didn't have it. I had to move money around in a really stressful way and borrow some, and it just felt terrible. And the whole time I kept thinking if I had just had a small cushion, like any cushion at all, this would have been annoying instead of actually scary. That's the feeling I want to talk about, because I think that feeling is where the real conversation about emergency funds needs to start. Not at 6 months of expenses, at the point where you're one unexpected bill away from a genuinely bad week. So I started looking into whether there was any version of this advice that applied to people who were just starting out. And I came across something that actually surprised me. Research from Vanguard looked at thousands of people and found that having just $2,000 saved for emergencies was linked to significantly better financial well-being. Like 21% better by their measure. Not 6 months of expenses, $2,000. And then there was another statistic that stuck with me. A Federal Reserve study found that something like a third of Americans would struggle to cover a $400 unexpected expense. Not $4,000, $400. Now that number hit differently for me because I've been that person. I've had that $400 moment where something breaks or something comes up and that number feels enormous because it's not sitting anywhere accessible. And reading that, I realized this is not a me problem. This is incredibly common, and if that many people are struggling with $400, then starting an emergency fund conversation at $10,000 or $12,000 is just completely skipping the part where most people actually live. So that's where the $100 idea comes in. And I want to be clear, this isn't some official financial advice I'm handing out. This is just me thinking through what actually makes sense for my situation, and maybe yours too. The idea is simple. Before you worry about 3 months of expenses or 6 months of expenses or any of that, just try to get $100 somewhere you won't touch it. Not in your regular checking account where it disappears into coffee and groceries. A separate account, something just sitting there for actual emergencies. Here's what I had to think through. Does $100 actually do anything useful? Is it worth bothering with? And honestly, my first instinct was no. $100 isn't going to cover a car repair. It's not going to cover a medical bill. It's not going to cover a month of rent if I lose my job. So what's the point? But then I started thinking about it differently. What problems does $100 actually solve? If my phone charger breaks and I need one today for work, that's solved. If I need to pay a small fee I forgot about, that's handled. If something small breaks and I need to get a bus or a ride somewhere unexpected, covered. The $100 isn't meant to handle catastrophes. It's meant to handle the small stuff that currently causes me to panic, borrow money, or make a bad financial decision under pressure. And here's the thing I realize. When you have zero saved, you deal with even small problems in stressful ways. You put tiny things on a credit card. You ask someone to cover you. You move money around and create a mess. And each of those small, stressful decisions adds up. The $100 fund doesn't solve big emergencies, but it stops the small emergencies from becoming big problems through bad decisions made under pressure. There's also something psychological happening here that I think is worth naming. When you have nothing saved, every unexpected expense feels like a crisis, because it is. There's no buffer between the problem and your ability to pay for it. But when there's even a small amount sitting there, the feeling shifts slightly. It's not panic, it's more like, okay, I have something, let me figure this out. That mental shift matters more than I expected. And the Vanguard research kind of backs this up indirectly. People with emergency savings reportedly spent way less time stressing about money each week compared to people with no savings at all. Almost double the hours of financial stress for people with nothing saved. And I believe that because money stress doesn't stay in its lane. It bleeds into everything else. Your focus, your sleep, your relationships, your work. So even a small amount of savings has a way of reducing that background noise. Okay, so here's where I had to get honest with myself about actually doing this. Because thinking through the logic is one thing. Actually finding $100 when you feel like you have nothing is another. And what I realized is that for most people in my situation, the problem isn't technically income. It's that money moves through the account so fast that nothing stays. Every dollar has somewhere to go, and the $100 for savings never gets prioritized because it never feels urgent until something goes wrong. So the only thing that actually seems to work, and this is what I'm trying now, is treating that $100 like a bill, like something that has to be paid before the money goes anywhere else, even if it's $10 a week, even if it's $5 a week. The goal is just to start building that pile before it gets spent on things that feel optional in hindsight. I'm not going to pretend I figured this out instantly. I definitely spent money on things I didn't need while complaining that I had no savings. And that's embarrassing to admit, but it's also true. And I think a lot of us do that without really noticing, because when there's no specific goal attached to that money, it just disappeared. So what I'm actually doing now is I opened a separate savings account, one that takes a couple of days to transfer from, so it's not immediately accessible when I'm being impulsive. And I set up a small automatic transfer every week. Not a huge amount, just enough that over a couple of months it gets to something meaningful. Starting with the goal of 100, then 200, then trying to build toward that 2,000 number that actually showed up in the research as making a real difference. The insight I reached after thinking all of this through is that the traditional advice isn't wrong. 3 to 6 months of expenses really would be a strong position to be in. But it sets an opening goal that's so far away for people starting from zero that it actively stops them from starting. And not starting at all is so much worse than starting small. The $100 emergency fund matters, not because $100 solves big problems. It matters because it proves to yourself that you can actually save anything. It builds the habit before it builds the number. And once the habit is there, the number can grow. My personal takeaway from all of this is pretty straightforward. I'm not trying to get to 6 months of expenses anytime soon. That's not the game I'm playing right now. The game I'm playing is, can I get to a point where a $200 unexpected problem doesn't make me feel like I'm falling apart? That's it. That's the real starting line. Not the one the traditional advice describes, but the one that's actually in front of me. And I think that's actually okay. I think there's value in finding the version of this advice that meets you where you are, instead of where some financial guide thinks you should already be. Now, obviously, once you have a small cushion, new questions start coming up. Like, where should that money sit? Should it be in a regular savings account? A high yield account? Does that even matter when the amount is small? And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, specifically about whether the interest rate on a savings account is something worth paying attention to when you're just getting started, or if that's a distraction. That's actually what I want to dig into next time, because there's a whole conversation around high yield savings accounts that I think is interesting, but also might be getting oversold for people in early stages of building savings. So I'm going to look into that and share what I figure out. If any of this resonated with you, or if you've been in that place where traditional financial advice just feels completely disconnected from your actual life, I genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. Not the aspirational version, the real one. Thanks for being here.